Did you treat her, or were you the overnight nurse for her on February 2nd? You recall?
Yes.
On this particular night, February 2nd, do you remember her making a particular request of you or ask you for something specific?
I think that was the night she wanted to reach out to her lawyer.
A nurse sat in a courtroom, sworn to tell the truth, and described the moment her patient, a woman who had just fallen from a third-story window, wrote 3 words on a whiteboard that changed everything. I want my lawyer. Not a request for pain medication. Not a question about her children. Not a cry for help about the injuries that had shattered her spine. She wanted her lawyer. And the nurse wrote it down because, as she put it, that was the first time the patient had referred to anything going on with the case. Picture this, a hospital room where a 32-year-old woman lies intubated, restrained to the bed with soft cuffs around her wrists.
During this time period on the 28th, do you recall whether the patient was placed into restraints?
Yes.
And why was that?
Well, we restrain all patients that are intubated for safety.
And why?
So they don't pull out the tube or pull out any lines that they...
2 police officers posted outside the door. She can't speak, she can barely move. Her spine is severed at T5 and T6. She has a burst fracture of C1. She's lost so much blood that she needed a massive transfusion protocol. And when she finally regains enough consciousness to write on a whiteboard, she doesn't ask about her recovery. She doesn't ask about her children. She asks for a lawyer. That's the image that defines this case. A woman who is simultaneously a patient, a prisoner, and a defendant, all in the same hospital bed. Before we go deeper into what the evidence actually shows, make sure you're subscribed to Shadow Jury Archives. Because we don't just cover the story, we follow the facts. The nurse had been treating Lindsay Clancy for days.
And how are you employed? What do you do for work?
I'm a nurse at Brigham and Women's Hospital, the trauma surgical ICU.
How long have you been a nurse?
She worked the night shift in the trauma surgical ICU at Brigham and Women's Hospital, a unit where the critically ill fight for their lives. Clancy had been admitted on January 24, 2023, after what prosecutors would later describe as a fall from a window.
And that was Lindsay Clancy. Do you recall treating her?
Yes.
And was she in that trauma surgical intensive care unit?
Yes.
But the nurse didn't know the details of the case. She wasn't there to investigate. She was there to keep her patient alive. On the first night, Clancy coded.
Is there a particular event that you were witness to for this particular patient?
She coded.
What does that mean?
Means her blood pressure dropped for her. It meant her blood pressure dropped and it wasn't sustainable.
Her blood pressure dropped so low it wasn't sustainable with life. The nurse started CPR. They did chest compressions. They placed bilateral chest tubes. They drained 100 to 300 cc's of blood from each side. They started a massive transfusion protocol. Clancy's core temperature was 82 degrees, dangerously low. They put a bear hugger blanket on her to warm her up. They gave her pressors. They gave her sedation. She was intubated, unable to speak, her body fighting just to survive. That first night, Clancy was unresponsive. She was sedated. The police officers outside the room weren't there to protect her from visitors.
And other than medical staff that were treating her that particular night, did you observe anybody else present?
She had 2 police officers outside the room.
They were there to make sure she didn't have any. A woman fighting for her life. And the state had already decided she was a threat. The nurse observed Clancy's condition over the following days. On January 28th, she was still intubated, still restrained, but she was becoming more responsive. The nurse started using a whiteboard to communicate. Clancy wrote that she was confused. She wrote that she couldn't feel her lower extremities. She wrote about her pain. And then, on February 2nd, something changed. She wrote 3 words that the nurse would later describe as remarkable. I want my lawyer. The nurse noted it in her records. When asked why she made that specific notation,
Her lawyer, correct?
Yes.
Was that something she had asked you before?
No.
And so did you think it was something worth noting?
Yes.
Why would you note something like that?
she said, because that was the first time she referred to anything going on with the case. That was the moment. In the middle of a hospital room, surrounded by medical equipment and police officers. A woman who could barely move and couldn't speak found a way to assert the one right she still had left. She couldn't walk. She couldn't use her legs. She was in soft restraints, and yet she had the clarity to ask for legal representation. Here's where the timeline becomes critical. Clancy had been under arrest since she arrived at the hospital. The medical records from January 25th indicate that the patient was under arrest, with police officers at her bedside. She was not allowed visitors. She had to check with the nursing director and the legal team to make sure it was even permissible to allow anyone in besides medical staff. Her access to the outside world was controlled by the state. And yet, when she asked for a lawyer, the nurse didn't try to stop her. She sent a consult to the social worker to coordinate reaching out to her attorney.
What did you do when she made that request? What was your response?
I sent what we call a consult to the social worker in order to coordinate reaching out to her lawyer.
Okay.
She wanted her lawyer. The nurse didn't deny it. She didn't minimize it. She simply did her job. The nurse also testified about Clancy's demeanor during her treatment. She described her as flat.
And what was your observations of the patient's demeanor now that she's extubated?
She's flat, no emotion either way.
No emotion either way. Alert and oriented, but flat.
How about being alert and oriented? Did you observe her to be alert and oriented?
Cooperative, but flat. When you're fighting for your life, intubated, unable to move, and surrounded by police, what exactly is the range of emotion you're supposed to display? The nurse had been a nurse for 27 years. She had worked in the trauma surgical ICU for 8 years. She had seen patients in every possible condition, and she described Clancy as flat, not angry, not hysterical, not irrational, flat, cooperative, alert and oriented. She wanted her lawyer. That's the refrain that echoes through this testimony. She wanted her lawyer. Not because she was delusional, not because she was psychotic, but because she understood exactly what was happening to her. A woman with a severed spine, in soft restraints, under police guard, writing on a whiteboard. And the state's own witness, a nurse who treated her for days, confirmed that she was alert, oriented, and capable of making that request. The prosecution called the nurse to establish the medical facts of the case. But what the nurse's testimony actually established was something far more damaging: a woman in the most vulnerable position imaginable, asserting her rights, and the state having to acknowledge that she did. She wanted her lawyer. She asked for her lawyer, and the nurse wrote it down. So ask yourself this: if Lindsay Clancy was so mentally incapacitated that she couldn't be held responsible for her actions, how was she able to request legal representation at the exact moment she needed it most? The public court record for this testimony is available through the Massachusetts trial court docket. Pull the transcript. Read the nurse's testimony yourself. Count how many times she described Clancy as alert, oriented, and cooperative. Then answer this in the comments when a woman who has just fallen from a window, who has suffered catastrophic spinal injuries, who is intubated and restrained, uses a whiteboard to ask for a lawyer. What does that tell you about her mental state at the moment that mattered most? If this breakdown helped you see the case differently, like this video, share it with someone following this trial, and subscribe to Shadow Jury Archives with notifications on, because we'll be back inside the courtroom with the next moment that matters.